The California sun glinted off Brian's polished car as he pulled into his driveway. His house, a testament to suburban success, stood proud. It was the picture of the American dream. He was living the good life, a beautiful wife, 2 healthy children, a fulfilling career. What more could a man ask for? Brian was an engineer, not just any engineer, but one of the leading minds in aerospace technology. His name was whispered in hushed tones at conferences. His insights were sought out by the industry's giants. He was a star, ascending ever higher. His work was demanding, but Brian thrived on the pressure. He loved the challenge, the intellectual stimulation of pushing the boundaries of what was possible. His dedication to his craft was unwavering, his focus absolute. Or so it seemed. Brian was living a lie, a double life, meticulously crafted and fiercely guarded. Behind his charming smile and confident demeanor, a secret lurked. A secret that, if revealed, threatened to shatter his carefully constructed world. The rumors started subtly, an offhand comment at a company function, a knowing glance from a colleague's spouse, whispers of a second life, a hidden family, followed Brian like shadows. He dismissed them as idle gossip, the byproduct of his high profile and the envy it inspired. But deep down, a seed of unease had been planted. He knew the truth. He was living a lie. And lies, no matter how well concealed, have a way of unraveling. The strain of maintaining his double life was taking its toll. The constant fear of exposure gnawed at him. The guilt of his deception weighed heavily on his conscience. He was living on a razor's edge, and the pressure was mounting. Brian tried to ignore the warning signs. He buried himself in his work, seeking solace in the familiar equations and technical drawings. But the whispers persisted, a constant reminder of the precariousness of his situation. The annual company picnic was supposed to be a relaxing affair, a chance for Brian to showcase his perfect family. His wife, Helen, radiant and charming, effortlessly navigating the social scene. His children, the epitome of well-adjusted youth, excelling at games and charming the adults. But the day was tainted by anxiety. Brian's eyes darted nervously around the crowd, searching for any sign of recognition, any hint that his secret was out. His smile felt strained, his laughter hollow. As the afternoon wore on, the pressure intensified. A chance encounter with a former neighbor, long since moved away, sent a jolt of fear through him. The woman had known him when he first started dating Maria. Had she figured it out? Brian excused himself, his heart pounding in his chest. He needed to escape, to find a moment of solitude amidst the suffocating normalcy of the event. But as he turned to leave, he saw her, Maria, standing at the edge of the crowd, her eyes locked on his. And in that instant, Brian knew. His carefully constructed world was about to come crashing down. Helen was the perfect picture of suburban elegance. Her days were filled with charity luncheons, school board meetings, and meticulously planned dinner parties. She ran their household with the precision of a military operation, ensuring every detail, from the perfectly manicured lawn to the children's impeccably ironed clothes, reflected their picture-perfect life. Their children, 12-year-old Emily and 9-year-old Ethan, were the embodiment of their parents' aspirations. Emily, a budding pianist, had already won several regional competitions, her trophies prominently displayed on the mantelpiece. Ethan, a natural athlete, excelled at soccer and baseball, his bedroom walls plastered with ribbons and medals. Brian cherished his family. He reveled in their accomplishments, basked in their love and admiration. He was their protector, their provider, the rock upon which their idyllic life was built. Or so he wanted to believe. The guilt gnawed at him, a constant undercurrent to his carefully constructed happiness. He loved Helen in his own way. He adored his children, their laughter a balm to his troubled soul. But it was a love tainted by deceit, a happiness built on a foundation of lies. Across town, in a modest 2-bedroom bungalow, another family awaited Brian's return. Maria, his secret partner of 7 years, was a woman of simple tastes and quiet strength. She worked as a florist, her days filled with the scent of lilies and roses, her creations bringing joy to others. Their son, 5-year-old Daniel, was a whirlwind of energy and curiosity, his laughter echoing through the small house. He had Brian's eyes, a mischievous twinkle that hinted at a shared love of adventure and a thirst for knowledge. Here, in this unassuming home, Brian shed the mask of success, the weight of his double life momentarily forgotten. He was simply Brian, a loving partner, a doting father. He helped Daniel with his building blocks, listened intently to Maria's tales of the day, his heart finding a peace it craved but could never fully grasp. Theirs was a love born of passion. Brian cherished these stolen moments, the normalcy he craved, even as the knowledge of his deception cast a long shadow over their happiness. The drive between his two lives was a stark reminder of the chasm that separated them. Leaving Helen's perfectly ordered world, he would shed the trappings of success, his expensive suit replaced by worn jeans and a comfortable sweater. He had become a master of compartmentalization, his life divided into neat, airtight boxes. Separate phones, separate email accounts, separate lives meticulously curated to avoid any overlap, any hint of his duplicity. The strain was taking its toll. Sleepless nights were punctuated by nightmares, his subconscious refusing to be silenced. The fear of exposure was a constant companion, a dark cloud hanging over his carefully constructed world. He knew the situation was unsustainable. Something had to give. But the thought of hurting either family, of shattering their happiness, filled him with a paralyzing dread. So he pressed on, trapped in the gilded cage of his own making, each passing day tightening the noose of his deceit. Brian's life was a carefully choreographed dance, a constant pirouette between two worlds. His work, with its demanding schedule and frequent travel, provided the perfect cover for his double life. He became a master of excuses, weaving elaborate tales of late-night meetings and urgent deadlines, each lie adding another brick to the wall of his deception. He clung to his routine with the desperation of a drowning man clinging to a raft. Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays were for Helen and the children, their calendar filled with school events, social engagements, and the carefully cultivated normalcy of their suburban existence. Tuesdays, Thursdays, and weekends were made up out-of-town work assignments for his time with Maria and Daniel, stolen moments of laughter and domesticity tucked away in their modest bungalow. Brian savored these days, the weight of his deception momentarily forgotten as he lost himself in the simple joys of fatherhood and partnership. He kept the two worlds rigidly separate, his mind a steel trap, holding fast to the carefully constructed boundaries he had erected. But even the most meticulously crafted facades have cracks, and Brian knew it was only a matter of time before the weight of his lies came crashing down. The pressure was relentless, a constant hum of anxiety that permeated Brian's waking hours. He saw suspicion in Helen's eyes, a flicker of doubt that sent a chill down his spine. He heard it in the hushed whispers of his colleagues, their sideways glances a constant reminder of his precarious position. He started making mistakes, small slips at first, easily dismissed or explained away. A misplaced phone, a forgotten birthday, a name uttered in his sleep. Each error, however insignificant, chipped away at his carefully constructed facade, the foundation of his double life slowly crumbling beneath the weight of his deceit. Sleep offered little respite, his nights haunted by vivid dreams, his subconscious refusing to be silenced. He would wake in a cold sweat, his heart pounding in his chest, the fear of exposure clinging to him like a shroud. The walls were closing in, and Brian felt himself suffocating under the weight of his lies. He tried to confide in a colleague, a friend he thought he could trust, but the words caught in his throat, the shame of his actions choking him. How could he possibly explain the unexplainable, justify the unjustifiable? So he retreated further into himself, his isolation growing with each passing day. The inevitable breakdown began subtly, a slow unraveling of the carefully woven tapestry of Brian's life. He became increasingly withdrawn, his once sharp mind clouded by fatigue and guilt. His work suffered, deadlines missed, projects delayed, his superiors noticing the change in their once star engineer. He found himself making excuses to avoid both families, seeking solace in the solitude of his office, the silence a welcome reprieve from the cacophony of his double life. But even in the quiet confines of his work, he couldn't escape the truth. It followed him like a shadow, a constant reminder of the impending disaster. One evening, after a particularly grueling day, Brian received a call from Emily's school. She had been injured during a soccer game, nothing serious, but they needed him to come immediately. Panic surged through him. He was supposed to be at Daniel's school play that evening, a promise he had made weeks ago, a promise he couldn't break. Torn between his two worlds, the weight of his lies crushing him, Brian made a choice. A choice that would have far-reaching consequences. A choice that would shatter the fragile peace he had so desperately tried to maintain. He chose Emily, his heart torn as he called Maria, his voice trembling as he fabricated a story, another lie to add to the ever-growing mountain of deceit. But as he hung up the phone, a single tear rolled down his cheek, a harbinger of the storm to come. The school play was a blur to Brian. His mind was elsewhere, replaying the frantic phone call, the sound of Maria's disappointment echoing in his ears. He sat through the performance, his smile a hollow imitation of genuine joy, his heart heavy with guilt. As he drove home that night, the weight of his deceit felt unbearable. He had never missed one of Daniel's events before. He had always managed to keep his two lives separate, but tonight the lines had blurred, and the consequences of his actions felt very real. He pulled up to Maria's house, his stomach churning with dread. He had to see Daniel, to apologize, to somehow make things right. As he reached for his phone, he saw her. Helen. Standing on the sidewalk across the street, her arms crossed, her face pale in the moonlight. His blood ran cold. How long had she been there? What had she seen? He wanted to run, to disappear, but his feet felt rooted to the spot. The world seemed to tilt on its axis, his carefully constructed reality crumbling before his very eyes. Helen's voice was ice cold, each word a shard of glass piercing Brian's carefully constructed facade.
Who is she, Brian?
She asked, her voice devoid of emotion. He had no answer. What words could possibly explain the betrayal, the years of deceit, the life he had built on a foundation of lies? He stumbled over his words, a pathetic attempt at explanation, at justification. But the truth was a tangled web, and the more he struggled, the more ensnared he became. Helen's eyes, once filled with love and trust, now burned with a mixture of hurt and anger that made him flinch. Inside the house, Daniel watched from the window, his small face etched with confusion and fear. He had never seen his father like this, his voice raised, his face contorted in a mask of anguish. Maria stood beside him, her hand resting protectively on his shoulder, her own expression a mixture of sadness and resignation. Brian's carefully constructed world was imploding, the walls he had so meticulously erected collapsing in on themselves. The truth, like a tidal wave, threatened to engulf him, leaving only destruction in its wake. The following days were a blur of pain and recrimination. Helen, devastated by the revelation, retreated into a world of icy silence. Her anger, though unspoken, hung heavy in the air, a suffocating presence that permeated their once happy home. The children, caught in the crossfire of their parents' shattered marriage, struggled to comprehend the enormity of their father's betrayal. Emily, once her father's pride, withdrew into herself, her silence a deafening indictment of his actions. Ethan, too young to fully grasp the situation, lashed out in anger, his childish outbursts a reflection of the pain and confusion that gnawed at him. The happy family portraits that adorned the walls of their home now seemed like cruel mockeries of a life that no longer existed. Maria, her own dreams of a shared future shattered, faced the harsh reality of her situation. She had always suspected that there was another woman, but the pain of confirmation cut deep, a constant reminder of the love she could never truly have. The drive back to Helen's house was a blur. Brian's mind raced, trying to grasp the magnitude of what had just happened. His carefully constructed world, a house of cards built on a foundation of lies, was collapsing around him. He pulled into the driveway, his hands trembling as he turned off the engine. The house was dark, the silence deafening. He sat there for a moment, dreading the confrontation he knew was inevitable. As he stepped out of the car, the porch light flickered on, casting long shadows across the manicured lawn. Helen stood in the doorway, her arms crossed, her face pale and drawn. The look in her eyes sent a shiver down Brian's spine. He had seen that look before, the look of disappointment, of betrayal, but this was different. This was the look of a woman scorned, a woman whose trust had been irrevocably broken. And in that moment, Brian knew that there would be no talking his way out of this one. Brian stood awkwardly in the foyer, his eyes darting nervously around the familiar surroundings. The family photos that once brought him comfort now felt like accusations, each smiling face a reminder of his deceit. Helen's voice, when she finally spoke, was low and controlled, each word laced with a venom that surprised even her. "Helen, so the rumors are true. Tell me, Brian, how long have you been living this lie?" Brian stammered, trying to find the words to explain the unexplainable. But there were no words. How could he possibly justify years of deception, the betrayal of the woman who had loved and trusted him implicitly? He looked at Helen, really looked at her, for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. The woman he saw standing before him, her face etched with pain and disbelief, was a stranger. And in that moment, Brian realized the true cost of his actions. He had not only destroyed his family, but he had also destroyed the woman he loved. The following days were a blur of anger, tears, and recriminations. Helen, her world shattered, retreated into a shell of icy silence. The children, caught in the crossfire of their parents' imploding marriage, withdrew into themselves, their youthful innocence lost forever. Brian, consumed by guilt and remorse, tried desperately to salvage the wreckage of his life. He pleaded with Helen for forgiveness, but his words rang hollow, the echoes of his lies still reverberating in the air. He tried to explain his actions to his children, but their eyes, once filled with adoration, now held a mixture of confusion and betrayal that cut him to the core. He had broken their hearts, and no amount of apologies could mend the shattered pieces. His carefully constructed world lay in ruins around him, the consequences of his actions far more devastating than he could have ever imagined. And as he surveyed the wreckage of his life, Brian was left with a single searing truth: some mistakes once made can never be undone. The news of Brian's double life spread like wildfire, a scandal that consumed the neighborhood, the company, their entire world. Whispers followed him everywhere, each syllable laced with judgment and disdain. His carefully crafted persona, the image of the successful engineer, the devoted husband, the loving father, lay shattered, the pieces scattered to the wind. Helen, her initial shock giving way to a cold, quiet fury, wasted no time in contacting a lawyer. Their meticulously curated life together, the shared dreams, the carefully constructed future, were now reduced to legal documents, their worth measured in dollars and cents. The children, their young minds struggling to comprehend the magnitude of their father's betrayal, retreated into themselves, their silence a deafening indictment of his actions. Emily, once so proud of her father's accomplishments, now recoiled at the mention of his name, her eyes filled with a hurt that ran deeper than words. Ethan, his childish innocence shattered by the revelation, lashed out in anger, his small fists pounding against his father's chest, his cries of "why" echoing through the empty house. Brian, his heart breaking with each accusation, each tear that streamed down his children's faces, had no answers, no words of comfort to offer. He had betrayed their trust, shattered their world, and there was nothing he could do to mend the broken pieces. The impact of Brian's deceit extended far beyond the walls of his two homes. Maria, her own dreams of a shared future now lying in ruins, faced the harsh reality of her situation. She had at times suspected that there might be another woman, but the public exposure, the shame and humiliation of it all, cut deep, leaving her feeling raw and exposed. Daniel, his innocent world turned upside down, struggled to understand why his father was no longer a constant presence in his life. He asked questions with a child's brutal honesty, questions that Brian couldn't answer without revealing the truth, a truth too painful, too complicated for his young mind to comprehend. Friends and colleagues, once eager to share in Brian's success, now distanced themselves, their expressions a mixture of pity and disgust. The whispers followed him everywhere, a constant reminder of his fall from grace, his carefully constructed life reduced to the subject of gossip and speculation. His career, once a source of pride and accomplishment, now lay in tatters. The company, eager to distance themselves from the scandal, wasted no time in showing him the door, his years of dedication, his countless contributions, erased with a single stroke of a pen. The consequences of his actions were swift and brutal, a stark reminder that trust, once broken, is not easily regained. In the aftermath of the storm, Brian found himself adrift, lost in a sea of regret and remorse. The two families he had tried so desperately to keep separate were now irrevocably intertwined, their lives forever marked by his betrayal. He tried to reach out to Helen to explain, to apologize, but she refused his calls. His letters returned unopened. A wall of silence erected between them, insurmountable and impenetrable. The pain in her eyes, the look of betrayal he had seen that night on the porch, haunted his waking hours, a constant reminder of the love he had destroyed. His visits with his children were strained, their interactions punctuated by awkward silences and forced smiles. He could see the judgment in their eyes, the unspoken questions that lingered in the air. He longed to bridge the chasm that separated them, to regain their trust, their love, but the weight of his deceit hung heavy, an impossible burden to overcome. He tried to be a father to Daniel, to salvage some semblance of a relationship from the wreckage of his life, but the guilt and shame were constant companions, casting a long shadow over their stolen moments together. He knew he had failed them all, his actions having far-reaching consequences that he could never fully comprehend. The road ahead would be long and arduous, but Brian knew he had no one to blame but himself. The consequences of his choices, the price of his deceit, would be his to bear alone. Brian's carefully constructed world, a testament to his ambition and his folly, lay in ruins around him. The life he had so meticulously crafted, the walls he had erected to conceal his secrets, had crumbled, leaving him exposed and vulnerable. The consequences of his actions, like the aftershocks of an earthquake, rippled outward, touching the lives of everyone he held dear. His career, once a source of pride and accomplishment, was gone. His reputation tarnished by scandal. The respect of his colleagues, the admiration of his peers had evaporated, replaced by a mixture of pity and disdain. The man who had once soared to such heights now found himself grounded, his wings clipped by his own deceit. The financial security he had worked so hard to provide for his families was gone, swallowed up by legal fees and the division of assets. The comfortable life he had promised Helen, the future he had envisioned for his children, had vanished, leaving behind only a bitter residue of what might have been. But the true cost of Brian's deception ran far deeper than any financial loss, any professional setback. He had betrayed the trust of those who loved him most, inflicting wounds that might never fully heal. The pain in Helen's eyes, the look of betrayal that had shattered their world, haunted his waking hours, a constant reminder of the love he had destroyed. The road to redemption, Brian soon discovered, was a long and arduous one. Haunted by guilt and remorse, he searched for a way to atone for his sins, to mend the shattered pieces of his life. But the damage he had inflicted ran deep, the scars of his betrayal slow to fade. He tried to be a presence in his children's lives, to salvage what he could of their shattered relationships. But the joy that had once characterized their interactions was gone, replaced by an awkward tension, an unspoken understanding that things would never be the same. He reached out to Maria, his voice thick with remorse as he apologized for the pain he had caused. He offered her his support, his friendship, but knew that nothing could erase the hurt, the sense of betrayal that shadowed her every move. And slowly, gradually, Brian began to understand the true nature of his transgression. It wasn't just the act of infidelity, the physical betrayal, that had caused so much pain. It was the erosion of trust, the shattering of faith that had left such a gaping wound in the lives of those he loved. Brian's story is a cautionary tale, a stark reminder that some choices, once made, can never be fully undone. It highlights the seductive nature of secrets, the allure of a double life, and the devastating consequences that inevitably follow when the truth is revealed. It speaks to the fragility of trust, the importance of honesty in our relationships with others and with ourselves. Brian's carefully constructed facade, his web of lies and deceit, ultimately crumbled under the weight of its own contradictions, exposing the flawed man beneath the surface. In the end, Brian's journey is not one of redemption, but of acceptance. He must come to terms with the consequences of his actions, the pain he has inflicted, and the knowledge that some wounds may never fully heal. His story serves as a reminder that true happiness, true fulfillment, can only be found in a life lived with integrity, a life where honesty and authenticity are the guiding principles, not secrets and deceit. For it is in the full embrace of truth, however painful that truth may be, that we find the possibility of forgiveness, reconciliation, and ultimately, the potential for growth and healing.